My wrists felt heavy before I opened my eyes. Not the kind of heavy you feel after a long night of drinking, or the lethargy that follows a brutal week closing deals. This was sharp. Localist. Cold, unforgiving metal biting into the skin stretched thin over my radial artery, pulsing with a rhythm that felt too slow, too weak, like my heart was pumping through molasses. I blinked against the harsh white glare of the recessed lighting. My mouth tasted like old pennies in sleep, that metallic tang that coats your tongue when you've been breathing through your mouth for hours. I tried to rub the grit from my eyes, and my left arm stopped dead. The sharp clink of metal echoed in the massive hollow space of the master bedroom. I looked up. A steel cuff, lined with cheap neoprene that had already begun to irritate my skin, circled my wrist. A heavy-duty chain connected it to the reinforced headboard of the bed I'd shared with my husband for 7 years. I tested the right arm. Same thing. My immediate reaction wasn't panic. It was annoyance. What kind of sick joke is Ethan playing? I muttered to the empty room, my voice scraping out like crushed gravel against a dry throat. We were alphas. We didn't do power play. We didn't do submission. Our entire dynamic was built on the friction of two immovable objects leaning against each other, pushing until one of us gave ground, and even then, it was never surrender. Just tactical retreat. It was exhausting, sure, but it was equal. Or so I believed for 7 years of marriage and 12 years of knowing Ethan freaking Whitmore. The en-suite bathroom door clicked open. Ethan stepped out fully dressed. Not just dressed, he was in his charcoal bespoke suit, the one he wore for hostile boardroom takeovers and international arbitration hearings. His tie was perfectly dimpled, the Windsor knot sitting just so against the collar of his crisp white shirt. The faint sharp scent of his aftershave, bergamot and vetiver, expensive and understated, drifted into the room. But underneath it was something else. Something heavy. His natural scent. Cedar splitting in a lightning strike. Pine needles snapping under a frost-heavy boot. A winter forest on the verge of burning. Usually, when he released his pheromones, even unconsciously, my own would spike in response. With smoke and cracked black pepper, the scent of a bonfire after rain, dry heat, and wild spice. A biological pushback. An alpha meeting an alpha, two territorial apex predators acknowledging each other with a chemical handshake that said, I see you. I don't bow, don't expect me to. I try to push back now. I flared my nostrils, digging deep into that instinctual well of dominance, that primal furnace that had burned in my chest since I presented at 16. Nothing happened. My chest felt hollow, empty. The furnace was cold. My scent glands, located right at the juncture of my jaw and neck, the sensitive bundle of tissue that should be pulsing with aggressive pheromones, felt numb. Dead. Like someone had reached inside me and turned off the pilot light. Good morning, Julian. Ethan's voice was smooth, warm, completely, terrifyingly composed. He walked to the bedside table and set down a ceramic mug. Black coffee. Steam curled off the top in lazy spirals that smelled like roasted beans and something else. Something chemical and sharp that made my nose itch. You slept for 16 hours. He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks, platinum, engraved with the Whitmore family crest. I had to cancel your morning meetings. The Tokyo team was very understanding. I told them you'd come down with a severe case of exhaustion. Unlock this. I didn't yell. Yelling gave away leverage. I kept my tone flat, authoritative, the voice I used with insubordinate contractors and junior architects who thought they could cut corners on load-bearing walls. Right now, Ethan. Ethan sat on the edge of the mattress. The springs didn't even creak. He reached out and brushed a thumb over the skin just beneath the steel cuff, stroking the bruised flesh with a tenderness that made my stomach turn over in a slow, sickening roll. I can't do that, Julian. His voice was almost apologetic. You know I can't. Ethan, take the fucking cuffs off. Your heart rate is elevating. He noted it calmly, tilting his head. His dark eyes were devoid of the usual warmth I'd woken up to for 7 years. They looked glassy, flat, like a frozen lake you could fall through and never climb out of. The doctor said the suppressants might make you irritable as your body adjusts. You need to stay calm, love. The transition is going to be hard enough without you fighting it. Suppressants. The word dropped into my head like a stone in a dry well. It took a second to connect the dots. My lack of scent, the hollow feeling in my chest, the metallic taste coating my tongue, the way my body felt slower, weaker, like someone had sanded down all my sharp edges. I yanked my arms forward hard. The chains pulled taut with a violent snap that jerked my shoulders out of their sockets. Pain flared hot and bright, radiating down my biceps, white-hot agony that made stars dance behind my eyes. The cuffs bit into my wrists, tearing the skin, and I felt warm blood trickle down my palms. Stop that. Ethan's voice dropped an octave. The Alpha command. Under normal circumstances, an Alpha command directed at me was just noise. A dog barking behind a fence. A territorial display that required nothing more than a dismissive flick of my metaphorical ears. I've been a lead alpha my entire adult life, the kind of alpha other alphas measure themselves against and usually found wanting. But right now, hearing that resonant, chest-deep rumble, a terrifying shiver ran down my spine. My muscles went slack involuntarily. My jaw unlocked. My breathing hitched into short, panic gasps that I couldn't control, no matter how hard I tried. Ethan smiled. It was a small, tight thing, like a wound closing. You see. He picked up the coffee mug, bringing it to my lips. His hand was steady, the pale skin over his knuckles stretched smooth. It's already working. Drink. You need to stay hydrated. The transition is going to be incredibly taxing on your organs. Transition. I spat the word out, turning my face away from the scalding coffee. Some of it sloshed onto the expensive duvet, soaking into the Egyptian cotton in a dark spreading stain. Have you lost your goddamn mind? I've never been clearer. Ethan set the mug down and leaned in close. His scent was overpowering now. Cedar and pine, but not the crisp, clean winter forest I remembered. This was a rotting, suffocating forest. The smell of a blizzard trapping you, freezing you, the darkness pressing in from all sides. It smelled like pure, unadulterated possession. We've been fighting our whole marriage, Julian. 2 alphas in one house. The stress is killing you. It's killing us. His voice cracked, just slightly, the first sign of emotion since he'd walked out of that bathroom. I've watched you for years. Watched the strain in your shoulders, the tension in your jaw. You never relax. You never stop fighting. Even when we're in bed together, you're on guard. We both are. It's exhausting. It's broken. So you decided to, what? Fix it by breaking me. I'm giving you peace. He reached up, cupping my face with a tenderness that made me want to scream. His thumb traced the curve of my jaw, stopping just below my ear, where my scent gland lay swollen and aching beneath the skin. By the time this regimen is over, your biology will rewrite itself. Your alpha traits will atrophy. Your body will learn to crave what I provide. You're going to be my omega, Julian. My mate, not my rival. Not my competitor. Mine. I stared at him. The man I married. The man who'd stood beside me at the altar 7 years ago. Both of us in matching white suits. Both of us radiating equal dominance, equal pride. The man who'd promised to build a life with me, not a cage. He wasn't joking. He was entirely, horrifyingly sincere. And as I lay there, feeling the cold steel bite into my wrists, the cynical, pragmatic part of my brain, the part that designed skyscrapers and calculated wind shear, realized the terrifying truth. I was trapped in a penthouse 70 floors up, chained to a bed by a man who had the wealth, the patience, and the utter lack of conscience to play God with my biology. You don't wake up one day and decide to genetically alter your husband. It's not an impulse decision. It requires planning, money, unethical medical professionals, a network of lies so intricate that even the most suspicious mind would dismiss the cracks as coincidence. Looking back, the architecture of my cage had been laid out months ago. I just didn't see the blueprints. Ethan and I ran Whitmore Vance Architectural, the most prestigious commercial architecture firm on the East Coast. We built skyscrapers. We were obsessed with structure, load-bearing walls, and controlled environments. I handled the raw design, the brutalist aesthetics, the sheer force of the concepts, the vision that made clients gasp when they saw the renderings. Ethan handled the execution. The clients. The meticulous detailing that kept our buildings from collapsing under their own weight. He was the engineer to my artist, the pragmatist to my dreamer. We were perfect complements. Or so I thought. 6 months ago, the argument started getting worse. Not about work. Work was our sanctuary, the one place where our rivalries produced something beautiful. No, the arguments were about space. About territory. About the constant low-grade war of being two alphas in a confined environment. I remember coming home from a site visit, smelling of concrete dust and ozone, my pheromones spiking from a day of aggressive negotiation. Ethan had been waiting in the kitchen. He cornered me against the marble island, burying his face in my neck and inhaling so deeply it sounded like a gasp. "You smell like a threat," he'd whispered, his teeth scraping against my scent gland with a possessiveness that should have alarmed me. "You always smell like a threat. Like you're about to leave. Like you're about to fight someone. Anyone. Even me." I'd pushed him off, laughing it away. "I smell like work, Ethan." "Back up." He hadn't backed up. He just stared at me, his jaw working, his dark eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Hunger. Fear. Both. Neither. The next week, my protein powder was replaced with a new brand. Ethan said it was better for my joints, with added joint-supporting compounds. I didn't think anything of it. The week after that came the vitamin injections. He insisted we both start taking them for longevity. "We're not getting any younger, Jules," he'd said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I want you around for a long time." He hired a private concierge doctor, a quiet man with dead eyes named Dr. Harrington. Harrington had the scent of a beta, neutral, unthreatening, like rubbing alcohol and bland professionalism. He came to the apartment every Sunday. I took the shots because I trusted Ethan. Because when you marry another alpha, you sign an unspoken treaty, mutual respect, mutual protection. We don't stab each other in the back. We don't poison each other's bodies. I've been so stupid. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, piecing it together. The lethargy I'd blamed on stress. The sudden drops in my aggression that I'd attributed to maturity. The way Ethan had been handling all the major negotiations lately, subtly pushing me into a background role, claiming I needed rest. He'd even been taking over my design projects, refining them with his meticulous attention to detail until they looked more like his work than mine. "You drugged me for months." I said it to the empty room, my voice cracking on the last word. Ethan had gone to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. I could hear the faint sizzle of bacon, the clink of dishes. The mundane domestic sounds made me want to scream. He walked back and carrying a tray. Eggs, bacon, toast, a glass of orange juice, a small white pill nestled in a tiny porcelain dish. He looked like a 1950s housewife trapped in the body of a 6'2" corporate shark, and the cognitive dissonance of it made my head spin. I prefer the term precondition. Ethan set the tray on my lap, carefully arranging the napkin across my thighs. He sat beside me, completely unbothered by the heavy chains, and picked up the fork. "If I'd hit you with a full dose of omega synthetics right away, your body would have rejected it. Alpha immune systems are incredibly aggressive. They attack foreign hormones like invaders. We had to break down your natural defenses first. Chip away at your testosterone levels. Weaken the gland. Make your body receptive." "You're insane." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. "Ethan, this is a felony. It's mutilation. When people find out, nobody's going to find out." He cut a piece of egg with a fork, the metal scraping porcelain. "You've decided to take a sabbatical. Mental health leave. The board was very understanding, especially after I showed them your erratic emails. I never sent any erratic emails. No, I did. From your laptop. He held a fork up to my mouth, the egg glistening with butter. Eat, Julian. You need your strength. I kept my mouth shut. I glared at him. Ethan sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. Don't be difficult. You used to be so rational. Rational. I finally snapped, my voice cracking. You chained me to a fucking bed because you couldn't handle being married to an equal. Because your fragile alpha ego couldn't stand not being the dominant one. Because you wouldn't stay, he yelled back. The sudden explosion of sound made me flinch. Ethan rarely yelled. He didn't need to. His composure cracked just for a second, and beneath the polish, beneath the bespoke suits and the cultivated calm, I saw the raw, desperate thing he'd been hiding for years. His chest heaved beneath the tailored waistcoat. The scent of freezing pine flooded the room, so sharp it made my eyes water. Not just cedar in winter, but ozone, electricity, the smell of a thunderstorm about to break. He leaned down, grabbing a handful of my hair and forcing my head back. His face was inches from mine, his breath hot against my cheek. You were pulling away, he hissed, his voice tight and shaking. Every day, you were pulling further and further away. I could feel it. You were always fighting me, always pushing, always trying to dominate. Every conversation was a battle. Every touch was a negotiation. I couldn't relax. I couldn't breathe in my own home without feeling like I had to defend my territory from my own husband. We're alphas. I choked out, the angle of my neck straining, the ache of my scent gland intensifying. That's how we are. We fight, we push, It's broken. Ethan's grip on my hair loosened, turning into a warped caress, his fingers threading through the strands like he was soothing a frightened animal. It's a broken system. I love you too much to keep fighting you. I love you too much to watch you exhaust yourself into an early grave. I want to take care of you. I want you to need me. And you will, Julian. I promise you, you will. He let go of my hair and stood up, smoothing down his jacket, adjusting his tie. The image of perfect control, restored in an instant. I have to go to the office. He picked up his briefcase from the armchair. The Henderson Project can't manage itself. Dr. Harrington will be here at noon for your next infusion. Be cooperative, love. It will hurt less if you don't fight it. Ethan, my voice cracked on his name. Don't leave me like this. The words tasted like ash on my tongue, pleading. I didn't plead. Julian Vance didn't plead. But the reality of the steel cuffs, the burning in my scent gland, and the horrifying chemical fog creeping into my mind was overriding every ounce of pride I'd ever possessed. He paused at the door, looking back. For a brief second, he looked like the man I fell in love with. Soft, caring. The man who'd held me through my father's funeral, who'd stayed up all night with me when I was sick, who'd built a life with me out of nothing but ambition and a shared vision. It gets worse before it gets better, sweetheart. His voice was barely a whisper. Just submit to it. It will hurt less. Then the heavy oak door clicked shut, and the lock engaged with a loud electronic beep. I was alone. The hours bled together. I spent the first 2 hours trying to break the bed frame. I bruised my heels kicking against the solid oak posts. I twisted my wrists until the skin tore and bled into the neoprene lining, leaving dark stains on the white sheets. My breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps, and sweat slicked my forehead, making my hair stick to my skin in damp strands. My strength was gone. That was the most terrifying part. The deep muscular endurance that had defined my biology for 34 years, the explosive power, the unyielding stamina, felt hollowed out. My arms shook with the effort of lifting the chains. My legs trembled when I tried to push myself up. I was a shadow of the alpha I'd been, and I hadn't even started the real transition yet. At exactly 12 p.m., the electronic lock on the front door beeped. Heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood. Dr. Harrington walked into the bedroom, looking exactly as he always did, bland, forgettable, carrying a black leather medical bag that smelled faintly of antiseptic. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my arm. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vance." "Dr. Harrington," I panted, trying to push myself up on my elbows. The chains rattled loudly. "Listen to me. I will double whatever Ethan is paying you. Triple it. Just unlock these cuffs and walk away. I'll make sure you're protected. I'll make sure you never have to deal with him again." Harrington unzipped his bag. He pulled out a large 4-fluid bag, a coil of plastic tubing, and a tourniquet. "Mr. Whitmore left specific instructions for your dosage today. We are escalating the synthetic estrogen and introducing the androgen blockers. Your body is going to feel disoriented. That's normal. Did you hear me?" I roared, thrashing my right arm. The chains snapped tight, and the pain in my shoulder flared white-hot. I'm being held hostage. This is assault. This is... Harrington finally looked at me. His eyes were completely devoid of empathy, flat and empty as a dead computer screen. He looked at me the way a mechanic looks at a rusted engine, with clinical disinterest. "Your husband holds medical power of attorney, Julian." His voice was calm, almost bored. "And quite frankly, your blood work from last month indicated severe stress-induced cardiomyopathy. Alpha-on-alpha marriages rarely last without physiological consequences. He is extending your life by castrating my biology, by turning me into by adapting it." Harrington stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed my left arm, and I tried to pull it away, but my muscles spasmed weakly. He was an alpha too, I realized. I could smell it now, a dull sterile scent like rubbing alcohol and old blood, heavily suppressed by medication. He was using his baseline strength to hold my arm still while he tied the rubber tourniquet just above my bicep. "Don't do this." My voice cracked. The fight was draining out of me, the sheer overwhelming reality of the needle approaching my vein breaking something in my chest. "Please, please don't." Deep breath. A sharp pinch in the crook of my arm. I hissed through my teeth, squeezing my eyes shut. Harrington taped the 4 needles securely to my skin, then hooked the tubing to the bag hanging from an impromptu hook Ethan had apparently installed on the wall days ago. I watched the clear liquid drip down the chamber. Drip, drip, drip. "What's in that?" My voice trembled. "A proprietary blend." Harrington packed away his unused supplies. Synthetic hormones, muscle relaxants, and an artificial bonding agent designed to rewire your olfactory receptors. Right now, your brain registers Mr. Whitmore's scent as a territorial threat. By tomorrow, your brain will register it as safety, comfort, home. You're going to brainwash me. I am merely adjusting the chemical signals in your amygdala. He checked my pulse, ignoring the way I flinched away from his cold fingers. "The transition will cause a fever. Your core temperature will rise over the next 6 hours. You will experience muscle cramps, nausea, and acute emotional distress. This is your body purging the remaining alpha testosterone." He picked up his bag. "Dr. Harrington." My voice dropped to a low, raw whisper. "When I get out of this bed, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to tear your throat out with my bare hands." Harrington didn't even blink. "You won't want to, Julian. Omegas are notoriously gentle creatures." He walked out. The door locked again. I lay there and watched the poison drip into my veins. It didn't take long to feel it. It started in the back of my neck, a slow creeping warmth that felt like standing too close to a space heater. Then my stomach lurched, a wave of intense, dizzying nausea washing over me, forcing me to turn my head and dry heave over the side of the mattress. Nothing came up but bile and coffee. My skin felt like it was shrinking. The muscles of my legs twitched, cramping so hard I cried out. It was a deep, bone-aching agony, as if my very skeleton was trying to reject the meat attached to it. I squeezed my eyes shut, panting through my nose. The apartment was completely silent, save for my own ragged breathing. Then the psychological shift began. It was insidious. I wanted to be angry. I was angry, but a thick, heavy fog was rolling over my thoughts. The sharp, cynical edge of my mind felt like it was being wrapped in cotton. The terror I'd felt earlier was morphing into something far worse, far more degrading. It was morphing into need. I was in pain. I was sick. And my chemically altered brain, stripped of its alpha independence, was desperately scrambling for a source of comfort. I buried my face in Ethan's pillow. It smelled like his aftershave. It smelled like pine and cedar, the winter forest I'd always associated with his scent. Before, that scent had made me want to establish dominance, to push back, to meet his territory with my own. Now, taking a deep breath of it sent a pathetic, whimpering shiver down my spine. The scent felt grounding. It felt like an anchor in the middle of a violent storm. No, I told myself, biting my lip until I tasted blood. Stop it. It's the drugs. But biology doesn't care about logic. The fever spiked. My skin slicked with sweat, and I pulled my knees to my chest, curling into a tight ball, the chains clinking uselessly against the iron bed frame. As the hours passed, and the room grew dark with the setting sun, my mind fractured. I stopped plotting my escape. I stopped thinking about revenge. The only thought looping in my fever-addled brain, a thought that made me hate myself more than I hated my captor, was, when is my husband coming home? The fever didn't break. It settled into my bones, a slow, simmering fire that cooked the fight out of my muscles. I lost track of time. Shadows stretched long and thin across the hardwood floor, merging into a dense, suffocating blackness. The penthouse was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic, maddening drip of the 4-bag beside my bed. My throat felt like cracked parchment. Every time I shifted, the steel cuffs bit into the raw, blistered skin of my wrists. I didn't care about the pain anymore. Pain was a secondary concern to the utter chaos unfolding in my bloodstream. The lock on the front door clicked. It was a sharp electronic sound, immediately followed by the heavy, solid thud of the oak door shutting. Footsteps, even unhurried, wearing leather-soled shoes. The scent preceded him down the hallway. Pine. Freezing, sharp pine needles crushed under heavy boots. 24 hours ago, that smell would have triggered a surge of adrenaline. My body would have produced its own sharp, peppery pheromones in a hard territorial pushback. But the 4-drip had done its work. The synthetic blockers had dismantled my defenses with clinical precision. When the scent of pine hit my nostrils, I didn't tense. I whimpered. The sound scraped out of my dry throat before I could stop it, pathetic and thin. My chemically ravaged brain grabbed onto that, sent like a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood. It smelled like safety. It smelled like the end of the fever. It smelled like home, and the realization made me want to vomit. Ethan walked into the bedroom. He'd taken off his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, exposing his forearms. He looked calm, utterly, terrifyingly composed. He didn't speak. He walked to the side of the bed, his dark eyes taking in the sweat-soaked sheets, the empty 4-bag, and my trembling, curled-up frame. He reached out and placed a cool, dry hand against my forehead. I leaned into the touch. I hated myself. I wanted to bite his fingers off, to tear the flesh from his hand, to scream until my throat bled. But my neck craned forward, chasing the cool relief of his skin. My eyes fluttered shut. I was a passenger in my own body, and the driver had gone insane. "You're burning up," Ethan said softly. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the alpha command but vibrating with a thick, possessive warmth. Dr. Harrington warned me the first purge would be violent. He pulled a small silver key from his pocket. The lock on my right wrist clicked, and the heavy steel cuff fell away, hitting the mattress with a muffled thud. Then the left. My arms dropped to my sides, useless dead weights. The blood rushed back into my hands, bringing a sharp, prickling agony. "Come here," He slid his arms under my knees and my shoulders, lifting me from the ruined bed. I was 6'2", 205 pounds of what used to be solid muscle, but Ethan lifted me easily, cradling me against his chest as if I were hollow. Maybe I was. My head lolled against his shoulder, and his neck was right there, his scent gland pulsing with that heavy, calming pine. I took a ragged breath, burying my nose into his collar. The fever in my blood demanded it. The new, parasitic biology taking root in my system craved it. Fight him. The rational, cynical part of my brain screamed. You're an architect. You're a CEO. Break his jaw. My arm twitched. My fingers curled into a weak fist against his shirt. That was all I could manage. Ethan carried me into the master bathroom. The harsh fluorescent lights had been dimmed, and the massive freestanding tub was already filled, steam rising in thick, lazy coils from the surface. He set me down on the edge of the toilet seat, keeping one hand firmly on my waist to stop me from sliding onto the floor. He began to undress me. It was methodical. Clinical. He stripped away my sweat-drenched clothes, his hands brushing over my skin with a detachment that somehow felt more violating than aggression. When I was bare, shivering violently despite the ambient heat of the room, he lifted me again and lowered me into the water. The heat of the bath shocked my system. I gasped, water sloshing over the porcelain edge. Shoo. Just breathe. Ethan knelt beside the tub, picking up a sponge. The hot water will help dilate your blood vessels. It speeds up the metabolism of the synthetics. He washed me, dragged the sponge over my shoulders, down my chest, over the bruising on my wrists. I sat there, knees drawn up, staring at the marble tiles on the wall. I was a ghost in my own body. Why? My voice was a whisper, raspy and broken. Ethan paused. He wrung the sponge out, the water trickling loudly in the quiet room. I told you why, Julian. It's a lie. I breathed, turning my head to look at him. My vision was blurry, but I could see the rigid set of his jaw. You don't want peace. You want a pet. Ethan's eyes darkened. The scent of pine spiked, growing sharper, colder. A warning. I want my husband, he replied, his tone chillingly even. But I want him to look at me the way you're looking at me right now. Not as a rival. As a provider. The aggression was killing us, Julian. You were always trying to win. In the boardroom, in the bedroom, in the kitchen. It was exhausting. Every day was a war of attrition. I couldn't relax. I couldn't breathe in my own home without feeling like I had to defend my territory from my own husband. We built an empire together. I countered, my chest heaving. Our friction, it built everything, and it nearly destroyed us. Ethan dropped the sponge and reached out, his wet fingers tracing the juncture of my jaw and neck, right over my scent gland. The tissue there felt swollen, agonizingly tender. Your body couldn't handle the constant testosterone spikes. Your heart was failing. I saw the medical reports you hid from me. I froze. The water rippled around me. You think I wouldn't find out? Ethan's thumb pressed slightly into the swollen gland, making me hiss in pain. You were dying, Julian. The stress of maintaining your alpha status against me was literally stopping your heart. I had a choice. Let you die a proud, stubborn alpha, or force you to adapt. To submit. And live. He leaned over the tub, pressing a kiss to my wet temple. I chose life, he whispered, even if I have to chain you to a bed to make you accept it. The human mind is incredibly resilient. It can rationalize almost any trauma, if given enough time and enough repetitive structure. But losing your biological imperative isn't a trauma you can rationalize. It's an amputation. 10 days passed. The fever finally broke on the 5th day, leaving behind a cold, hollow emptiness that felt worse than the pain. I was allowed out of the bedroom, but the penthouse was locked down. The biometric scanners on the elevators were reprogrammed. The heavy glass doors to the balcony were sealed shut with new electronic locks. I was a ghost haunting 4,000 square feet of polished concrete and imported leather. The physical changes were subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The deep, resonant timbre of my voice began to thin out. When I tried to shout, it cracked. The dense muscle mass I'd maintained through years of boxing and weightlifting began to soften. It wasn't that I was getting fat, the muscle tissue itself was restructuring, leaning out, losing its fast twitch explosiveness. My shoulders, once broad and imposing, seemed to slope inward. My jaw, once sharp enough to cut glass, softened at the edges. But the worst change was the sink gland. The lump at the side of my neck burned constantly as Dr. Harrington's weekly infusions forced it to atrophy and rebuild. The sharp, peppery scent of my alpha nature was gone. In its place, a sickly sweet aroma began to seep out of my pores whenever I felt anxious or afraid. It smelled like bruised cardamom and burnt sugar, an Omega's distress signal. I hated it. I spent hours in the shower, scrubbing my skin with harsh, unscented soaps until I bled, trying to wash the submission off me. It never worked. Ethan treated the entire situation with a horrifyingly domestic normalcy. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Ethan sat at the massive oak dining table, drinking espresso and reviewing a stack of blueprints. I walked into the kitchen, wearing a pair of loose linen trousers and a soft cashmere sweater that felt like a costume. My suits were gone. Ethan had removed them all from my closet. "Good morning." Ethan didn't look up. He slid a plate of eggs and avocado toast across the table. "You lost a lot of weight during the fever." I ignored the plate. I walked over to his side of the table and stared down at the blueprints. They were for the new commercial complex in the financial district, my project, the one I'd spent 8 months designing before Ethan drugged me. "You changed the load-bearing columns in the atrium," I said. My voice sounded flat, but the anger was bubbling hot and frantic beneath the surface. "You replaced the reinforced steel with decorative concrete." Ethan finally looked up. He took a slow sip of his espresso. The client wanted a softer aesthetic. The steel was too brutalist. "It's a structural necessity." I slammed my hand down on the table. The ceramic espresso cup rattled. The atrium roof is pure glass. The wind shear at that altitude requires steel tension. Decorative concrete will crack within 5 years. "You're compromising the integrity of the building." Ethan sighed. He folded his hands over the blueprints. "Julian, you're not on the project anymore. You're on sabbatical. I am the lead architect now. Not anymore." He stood up, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator who knows it has the high ground. "I am the CEO," he said calmly. "I make the final decisions. And my decision is that the concrete stays." The pure, unfiltered arrogance in his voice triggered something deep and dormant inside me. The phantom limb of my alpha pride twitched. Without thinking, I grabbed the heavy glass paperweight sitting on the edge of the table and swung it at his head. It was a fast, lethal strike. A week ago, it would have connected. But my muscles were slow now, the synthetic relaxants in my blood delaying the kinetic chain. Ethan caught my wrist mid-air, his grip like a steel vise. He didn't even flinch. He twisted my wrist, forcing my fingers to open. The glass paperweight hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. I tried to pull away, throwing my left fist toward his ribs. He caught that too. He pinned both my arms against my chest and stepped into my space, backing me up until my spine hit the edge of the dining table. "Stop." Ethan dropped his voice an octave, unleashing the pure concussive force of an alpha command. The effect was immediate and devastating. My newly formed Omega biology reacted before my brain could process the indignity. My knees buckled, all the strength draining out of my legs, turning my muscles to water. My lungs seized, forcing me to take shallow, panicked gasps. If Ethan hadn't been holding me, I would have collapsed onto the floor. "Look at you." Ethan leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. The heavy scent of frozen pine washed over me, suppressing the panic, forcibly calming my racing heart. You try to fight, but your body knows the truth. It wants to yield. Fuck you. I choked out, tears of pure humiliation stinging my eyes. I couldn't stand up. My body was betraying me, leaning its weight entirely against him. Shoo. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me into a firm embrace, burying his face in my neck. He inhaled deeply over my aching scent gland. There it is. Cardamom. You smell so sweet when you're frustrated. He stroked my hair, his touch infinitely gentle, infinitely cruel. You don't have to worry about wind shear or steel tension anymore, Julian. You don't have to carry the weight of the sky. I'll carry it for you. You just need to let me. I squeezed my eyes shut, a hot tear slipping down my cheek. The horror wasn't that he was holding me captive. The horror was that as I leaned against his chest, inhaling the scent of pine, a small, chemically engineered part of my brain felt relieved. A cage is only functional if the bird understands it cannot leave. Ethan needed to test the bars. He needed to see if the psychological conditioning held up under pressure. We're having a guest for dinner, he announced on Thursday evening, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. He was watching me fold laundry, a mundane domestic task he'd slowly integrated into my routine. My hands paused over a linen shirt. Ooh, Harrison Blake. The name sent a spike of cold dread through my stomach. Harrison was our primary investor, a massive, boisterous alpha who smelled strongly of damp earth and copper. He was exactly the kind of man I used to lock horns with during board meetings, trading veiled insults and aggressive posturing. He was an alpha's alpha, the kind who'd see my transformation as the ultimate tragedy. No, my voice was tight. Ethan, please. Not him. It's a business dinner, Julian. I need him to sign off on the new budget. Ethan walked into the room, pulling a dark velvet jacket from a garment bag. And it will be good for you to socialize. You've been cooped up. I'm locked in. I threw the folded shirt onto the bed. I am a prisoner. And you want to parade me in front of Harrison? He knows me. He knows what I am. He knows what you were. Ethan's tone turned sharp. He tossed the velvet jacket onto the bed beside the shirt. Put this on. Dinner is at 8. And Julian, he paused, his dark eyes boring into mine. I expect you to be gracious. Don't make me use my voice. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The memory of my knees buckling in the kitchen made my stomach churn. I swallowed hard, dropping my gaze to the floor. Yes, Ethan. At exactly 8 p.m., the elevator chimed. I was standing in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, trying to stop my hands from shaking. I wore the dark velvet jacket over a silk shirt, the fabrics feeling heavy and cloying against my altered skin. I heard Ethan's hearty greeting, followed by Harrison's booming laugh. Ethan, my man, good to see you. Penthouse is looking pristine as always. Harrison stepped into the living room, and immediately the atmosphere in the apartment changed. The air grew thick. Harrison's scent, copper and wet dirt, rolled into the space like a physical shockwave. It was aggressive, unfiltered. Before the transition, I would have met that scent with my own. I would have stepped forward, squared my shoulders, and pushed back until the air in the room equalized. Now my breath hitched. The copper scent hit my olfactory receptors and screamed threat. My newly formed Omega instincts flared in absolute panic. My heart hammered against my ribs, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I instinctively took a step backward, pressing my spine against the marble counter of the kitchen island. Harrison, glad you could make it. Ethan took the man's coat. Harrison turned, catching sight of me in the kitchen. He paused, his thick brow furrowed. He took a deep breath, inhaling the air, and I saw the exact moment confusion in his eyes morphed into shocked realization. Julian. He took a step toward the kitchen. The closer he got, the more overwhelming his scent became. It felt like heavy soil pressing down on my chest, burying me alive. My hands gripped the edge of the marble counter, so hard my knuckles turned white. My scent gland throbbed, releasing a desperate, panicked wave of sweet cardamom. "Julian, what happened to you?" Harrison's eyes were wide, scanning my softer features, the lack of tension in my shoulders, the defensive curve of my posture. "You smell like—" He had a medical emergency. Ethan intervened, stepping smoothly between Harrison and me. His own scent, the frozen pine, flared sharply, cutting through Harrison's earthy aroma. A clear territorial boundary. Mine. Back off. A severe hormonal imbalance. The doctors had to take drastic measures to stabilize his heart. "He's transitioned." Harrison stared at Ethan, then looked over his shoulder at me. The disgust, the pity in his eyes was a physical blow. To an alpha who fell to the bottom of the hierarchy was a tragedy. "Broken thing. Christ." Harrison muttered, taking a step back, subduing his own scent out of awkwardness. "I had no idea." "I'm sorry to hear that, Julian." I couldn't speak. I was trembling. The clash of the two alphas in the room was short-circuiting my nervous system. Ethan turned to me, holding out a hand. "Come here, Julian," he said softly. My brain screamed in humiliation. I wanted to tell Harrison the truth. I wanted to scream that I was drugged, chained, violated. But when I opened my mouth, a heavy wave of Harrison's residual scent drifted toward me, and the primal terror in my blood spiked. I didn't think. Biology took the wheel. I stepped away from the counter, walked over to Ethan, and took his hand. He pulled me close, tucking me firmly against his side. The scent of pine engulfed me, shielding me from the copper and dirt. It felt incredibly, disgustingly safe. My trembling stopped. My breathing leveled out. I pressed my face into Ethan's shoulder, hiding from Harrison's pitying stare. "He's still adjusting to crowds," Ethan told Harrison, rubbing a soothing hand up and down my spine. "Why don't we sit down?" "Julian, pour the wine." I pulled away from Ethan's chest. I didn't look at Harrison. I walked to the dining table, picked up the bottle of Cabernet, and began to pour. As the dark red liquid filled the glasses, I realized the ultimate cruelty of Ethan's design. He didn't just break my body. He engineered my mind so that the very man who built my cage was the only place I could find sanctuary. The trap was sprung, and I had walked into it, dragging the chains behind me. Chemical cages have a fatal flaw. They require maintenance, concrete sets and steel holds, but synthetic hormones have a half-life. They metabolize. They filter through the liver, pass through the kidneys, and eventually leave the body. Ethan knew this. It was why Dr. Harrington visited every Sunday for the heavy infusions, and why Ethan personally handed me 2 hexagonal blue pills every morning with a glass of water. I took them for 6 weeks. I swallowed them because my altered brain was terrified of the withdrawal, terrified of disappointing the heavy pine-scented presence that paced the penthouse. Until week 7. Ethan had a morning conference call with overseas investors. He was distracted. He set the water and the pills on the bathroom counter while I was brushing my teeth, tapped my hip affectionately, and walked out, his mind already negotiating exchange rates. I stared at the blue pills sitting on a marble. A sharp, sudden spike of nausea hit me, not from the drugs, but from the realization of my own compliance. I looked in the mirror. My jawline was softer. The aggressive forward lean of my posture was gone, replaced by a defensive curve of the shoulders. I looked like a stranger. I looked exactly how Ethan wanted me to look. I picked up the pills. They were chalky. They smelled faintly of alkaline and binding agents. I didn't swallow them. I placed them under my tongue, took a sip of water, and walked into the bedroom where Ethan was putting on his watch. He glanced at me, noting the empty glass. He smiled. "Good boy," he murmured. The praise sent a sickening wave of warmth through my chest, a biological reward engineered by the very pills melting against my sublingual glands. I nodded, kept my mouth shut, and walked back into the bathroom. I spat the blue sludge into the sink and washed it down the drain with scalding hot water. The first day without the oral supplement was imperceptible. The second day, the withdrawal began. It started as a dull throb behind my eyes, right at the base of my skull. By the third day, my skin felt too tight. The sweet, bruised cardamom scent of my omega biology began to sour, picking up an acidic, metallic edge. My body was panicking, caught between the artificial submission and the starved, buried remains of my alpha genetics. I hid the symptoms. When Ethan came near, I forced my breathing to slow. When he touched me, I suppressed the violent shudder that threatened to tear through my spine. I played the role. I made the coffee. I folded the cashmere blankets. I let him hold me at night, let his scent wash over me, and I smiled. But beneath the surface, the thick, heavy fog in my mind was thinning. The architectural, cynical part of my brain, the part that analyzed load-bearing walls and stress fractures, began to wake up. I stopped looking at the penthouse as a home. I started looking at it as a schematic. The front door was solid steel core wrapped in oak. The biometric lock required Ethan's thumbprint and a 6-digit rolling code. The balcony doors were tempered glass rated for hurricane-force winds, locked from the inside by a digital deadbolt tied to the mainframe. The elevator bypassed our floor unless summoned by a registered FOB. It was airtight. But I was an architect. I knew that no system is truly closed. Every building code in the city required a fail-safe. Life safety regulations mandated that in the event of a catastrophic thermal event, a fire, all electronic retention systems had to disengage. You cannot trap people inside a burning box. If the fire suppression system detected a localized heat spike exceeding 160 degrees Fahrenheit, the magnetic locks would drop. The elevator would automatically recall to the ground floor. The emergency stairwell doors would unlock. I just needed fire. And I needed Ethan to trust me completely. So I could get it. You're quiet tonight. Ethan poured a measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler, the ice cracking sharply in the silence of the living room. He walked over to the leather sofa and sat beside me. The ambient lighting cast long, soft shadows across his face. Just tired, I said, my voice soft and airy. The lack of pills was making my throat ache, but I kept my tone level. Subservient. I leaned my head against his shoulder, a calculated move. I needed him to feel my proximity, to register my complete lack of resistance. Ethan's arm wrapped heavily around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. He inhaled deeply, his nose pressing into my hair. I felt his chest expand. Your scent is changing, he noted, his voice a low, vibrating hum. It's not as sweet. It smells deeper. My heart gave a hard, panicked thump. The withdrawal was altering my pheromones faster than I anticipated. I forced myself to relax into his grip, letting my hand rest lightly on his thigh. Dr. Harrington said the final phase of the transition would be unpredictable. I lied smoothly, terrifyingly easily. My body is just settling. Ethan took a sip of his scotch. He didn't sound entirely convinced. But the physical reality of my body draped willingly over his was overriding his paranoia. Alpha biology thrives on physical submission. He couldn't help but feel victorious with my head resting on his collarbone. I let my eyes wander. On the coffee table, right next to his stack of corporate reports, sat a heavy silver DuPont lighter. Ethan didn't smoke cigarettes, but he occasionally clipped a cigar when finalizing a major contract. I was thinking, Ethan said, his thumb drawing lazy circles on my hip, we should start looking at property outside the city. Upstate somewhere with acreage. The city air is too sharp. You need somewhere quiet to properly nest. The word made Baal rise in the back of my throat. He was already planning the next iteration of the cage. A gilded barn in the middle of nowhere where no one would hear the heavy steel doors locking. That sounds nice, I whispered. I shifted my weight, dragging my chest subtly against his arm, and reached out toward the coffee table. Pretending to reach for my own glass of sparkling water, my hand brushed past the corporate reports, and my pinky finger snagged the silver lighter. I pulled it smoothly off the edge of the glass table, and let it drop into the deep pocket of my oversized cardigan. It made a faint, heavy clink against the fabric. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy burying his face in my neck, chasing a scent that was rapidly decaying into static. "I love you, Julian." His lips pressed wetly against my bruised scent gland. "I just wanted us to be happy." "I know," I replied, staring blankly at the dark cityscape through the reinforced windows. "I know you did." I waited until midnight. Ethan was a deep sleeper, a luxury afforded to men who believed they controlled the world. I lay rigidly beside him, listening to the slow, even cadence of his breathing. The scent of pine in the bedroom was suffocating, thick with contentment and territorial safety. I slid out of the bed. The mattress didn't creak. The floorboards were cold under my bare feet. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked through the cavernous living room, relying on the faint ambient glow of the city filtering through the glass. My destination was the primary mechanical closet in the hallway, situated exactly 20 feet from the front door. I slipped inside the narrow closet and closed the louvered door behind me. It smelled faintly of ozone and dust. Above me, tucked discreetly behind a vent, was the primary thermal sensor for the penthouse's fire suppression manifold. I pulled the silver lighter from my pocket. It felt incredibly heavy, cold steel in my trembling hand. In my other hand, I held a can of aerosol hairspray I'd taken from the master bathroom earlier that evening. A crude, volatile combination. A makeshift torch. My hands were shaking. The withdrawal was peaking. My joints ached and my vision swam with dark spots. But beneath the physical agony, a sharp, violent clarity cut through the dark. I wasn't just an Omega trying to flee a dominant mate. I was Julian Vance. I was an architect dismantling a flawed structure. I held the aerosol can up toward the vent. I flicked the DuPont lighter. A small, elegant blue flame sprang to life, illuminating the cramped closet. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the nozzle. The aerosol caught the spark instantly. What began as a delicate, elegant blue flicker transformed into a roaring 2-foot jet of localized hellfire. The sound was a violent rushing hiss in the cramped confines of the mechanical closet. The heat hit my face like a physical blow, instantly drying the sweat on my forehead and searing the fine hairs off my knuckles. I didn't blink. I held the makeshift blowtorch steady, directing the apex of the flame directly at the white plastic housing of the thermal sensor mounted on the ceiling. 5 seconds. The smell of melting polyurethane filled the tiny space, acrid and chemically sweet, coating the back of my throat. My thumb cramped against the nozzle. The withdrawal symptoms in my joints screamed in protest, a dull, agonizing ache that threatened to buckle my knees. 10 seconds. The plastic housing began to warp, sagging downward in noxious black bubbling strings. Click. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A heavy, resonant mechanical clank that reverberated through the drywall. The primary circuit breaker, registering a catastrophic thermal anomaly, committed ritual suicide to save the building. The penthouse plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The ambient hum of the refrigerator, the gentle whir of the climate control, the subtle vibration of the city's power grid, all of it died in a fraction of a second. Then came the scream. The fire alarm didn't just ring. It shrieked. A high-frequency, ear-splitting klaxon designed to wake the dead and force them to run. Simultaneously, the emergency strobes embedded in the ceiling activated. The hallway was suddenly painted in violent, rhythmic bursts of crimson light. Flash, dark, flash, dark. And beneath the wailing siren, I heard the mechanical symphony of my liberation. Clack, clack, clack. The magnetic deadbolts disengaged. The failsafe had worked. The cage had unlaced its own door. I dropped the lighter and the burning aerosol can onto the tile floor. I kicked the closet door open and threw myself out into the flashing red hallway. The strobe lights were profoundly disorienting, slicing the world into disjointed, bloody frames. My bare feet slipped slightly on the polished hardwood, but I caught my balance. My eyes locked on the heavy oak of the front door, just 20 feet away. I lunged forward. Julian. The sound of my name wasn't human. It tore through the shrieking of the alarm, a feral, guttural roar of absolute, unadulterated territorial panic. I reached the door. My fingers wrapped around a cold, heavy brass handle. I yanked it down. The latch clicked. The door pulled backward, heavy and free, letting in a rush of stale, cold corridor air. Before I could slip through the gap, a shadow eclipsed the red strobe light behind me. A heavy, bruising hand slammed into the wood right above my head, driving the door shut with a bone-jarring slam that rattled my teeth. Ethan stood over me in the pulsing red light. He looked like a monster pulled straight from the deepest, most primal corner of the human psyche. He was shirtless, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. His eyes were entirely dilated, black pools of adrenaline and rage. The scent of calming, possessive pine was completely gone. In its place was the raw, metallic stench of an alpha whose den had just been breached. It smelled like ozone, crushed ice, and blood. It was a scent designed by evolution to paralyze prey. And it worked. My newly forged Omega biology betrayed me with terrifying speed. My nervous system short-circuited. The overwhelming wave of aggressive pheromones crashed into my altered brain, screaming at me to submit, to yield, to drop to my knees and bare my throat to the dominant predator. My legs turned to water. A pathetic, reedy whine scraped up my windpipe, tasting like ash and fear. "What did you do?" Ethan snarled. His voice was a physical pressure in the narrow hall. He grabbed me by the throat. He didn't use the alpha command. He was too deeply buried in his own biology, reacting purely on instinct. He lifted me off the hardwood, slamming my spine against the solid oak of the door. My lungs seized. His fingers, broad and incredibly strong, dug into my windpipe, pressing directly into the tender, chemically ravaged tissue of my scent gland. The pain was blinding. I kicked out frantically, my bare heels striking his shins, but it was like kicking concrete. I had no leverage. I had no mess. The weeks of synthetic hormone therapy had cannibalized the dense, explosive muscle I once possessed. My hands clawed at his wrists, my nails scraping uselessly against his skin. "You're not leaving," Ethan hissed, his face inches from mine. The red strobe light caught the manic, terrified glint in his eyes. He wasn't just angry. He was terrified. He was losing his possession. "You are mine, Julian. I built this for you. You are mine." Black spots danced at the periphery of my vision. My chest burned with a desperate need for oxygen. The red flashes of the alarm smeared into a continuous, muddy streak of crimson. I was going to die right here, pinned against the door of my own home, choked out by the man who claimed to love me. I was a structural engineer. I had mapped the electrical grid, bypassed the biometrics, and outsmarted the physical cage. But I had failed to account for the sheer, brutal reality of the human element. As Ethan leaned his weight into my chest, his expression twisting into a mask of desperate possession, a sudden, cold clarity sliced through the panic in my brain. Ethan was an alpha. He was acting entirely on instinct. An instinct relies on predictable patterns. When an alpha asserts physical dominance over an omega, the biological script demands submission. The prey stops fighting. The prey goes limp. They never expect the prey to fight dirty. I stopped kicking. I dropped my arms to my sides. I let my full weight hang from his grip, going entirely boneless and limp. Ethan felt the sudden lack of resistance. His brain, hardwired by thousands of years of genetics to recognize the physical cue of submission, stalled for a fraction of a millisecond. The crushing pressure on my windpipe lessened. He expected a whimper. He expected surrender. I didn't give him either. I brought my right hand up from my waist in a short, vicious arc. I didn't curl my hand into a fist. I didn't have the kinetic power for a knockout blow anymore. Instead, I kept my fingers rigid, forming a tight, stiffened wedge, and drove them directly into Ethan's eyes. Ethan screamed. It was a wet, horrific sound that completely drowned out the fire alarm. He instantly released my throat, stumbling backward, both hands flying to his face. The pure blinding agony of the strike overrode every territorial instinct firing in his nervous system. I dropped to the floor, my knees hitting the hardwood hard. I gasped, sucking in a ragged, painful breath of air that felt like swallowing broken glass. I didn't try to stand up. There was no time for grace. I lunged forward on my hands and knees, grabbing the brass door handle and dragging it down with all my remaining body weight. The door opened. I scrambled out into the sterile, brightly lit corridor of the 70th floor. The heavy oak door swung shut behind me, the latch clicking softly into place. I was out. I hauled myself up, leaning heavily against the corridor wall. My legs were shaking so violently I could barely support my own weight. The fire alarm was still shrieking inside the penthouse, but out here, insulated by the soundproofing, it was a distant, muffled wail. I didn't look back. I stumbled down the hallway, my bare feet leaving damp, sweaty prints on the carpet, moving blindly toward the glowing green emergency exit sign. I hit the heavy metal fire door with my shoulder, pushing it open, and threw myself into the concrete stairwell. I ran down 70 flights of stairs. I lost count around the 40th floor. The descent was a blur of gray concrete, yellow painted railings, and the echoing slap of my bare feet. The physical toll was agonizing. The bottoms of my feet blistered and bled. My lungs burned with a searing metallic heat. My knees felt like they were filled with crushed gravel, threatening to hyperextend with every downward leap. Every time a door rattled somewhere above me in the vertical shaft, my heart seized, convinced it was Ethan recovered and hunting. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I finally reached the ground floor, my legs gave out completely. I hit the final landing on my hands and knees. I crawled toward the heavy exit door, reached up, and hit the crash bar. The door swung open, and I spilled out into the alleyway behind the high-rise. The shock of the outside world hit me like a bucket of ice water. It was pouring rain. The cold, wet asphalt was slick and black, reflecting the amber glow of the city streetlights. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete, automobile exhaust, and rotting garbage from the nearby dumpsters. It was the most magnificent thing I had ever breathed. I dragged myself away from the door, crawling until my back hit the rough, wet brick of the alley wall. I collapsed against it, sliding down until I was sitting in a shallow puddle of freezing rainwater. I sat there, shivering uncontrollably, the rain plastering my thin shirt to my skin, washing away the sweat and the lingering phantom scent of frozen pine. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. My knuckles were red and blistered from the fire. My wrists still bore the faint, yellowish bruising from the steel cuffs. I reached up, my fingers gingerly touching my own throat, right beneath my jawline. The altered scent gland throbbed, swollen and tender. Even now, shivering in the cold, it was releasing a faint, sugary aroma of bruised cardamom. An Omega's distress signal, bleeding helplessly into the wet city air. I had beaten the system. I had broken the cage. I had outsmarted the man who tried to play God with my biology. But as I pulled my bleeding knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around myself, a profound hollow grief settled in my chest. Ethan didn't just lock me in a room. He had reached into the very foundation of my identity and systematically removed the load-bearing walls. My alpha strength, the aggressive, unyielding edge that had defined my entire existence, was gone forever. I would never stand shoulder to shoulder in a room full of predators again. I would never smell like wood smoke and cracked black pepper. The architecture of my body had been permanently redesigned. I leaned my head back against the cold, wet brick, letting the rain wash over my face. I was an Omega, a scarred, chemically altered, physically weakened Omega sitting barefoot in a dirty alleyway. I was completely broken. But as I took another deep, ragged breath of the exhaust-choked city air, a small, cynical smile touched the corner of my mouth. I was broken, but I was mine. Then,